Good afternoon, Technation. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. This is our third webinar for 2016, and we have over 25 scheduled for the entire 2016 year. We appreciate your continued support as we have over 300 pre-registered attendees for today. Today's presentation is eligible for 0.1 CE credits from the ACI. Certificates are awarded to attendees that complete the post-webinar survey, and we have a surprise giveaway for the survey we will announce at the conclusion of today's webinar. Keeping in the spirit of supporting the Technation and the HCM community, right now we're going to give away a great-looking Technation pullover to the attendee that can tell me where this year's Imaging Conference and Expo, now called ICE, will be held. Use the question feature on the webinar dashboard to tell us the city and or state. While you're answering, I want to remind you that we have our Spring MD Expo coming up in Dallas in 57 days. Today's webinar sponsor, AlphaSource, has included a VIP pass in the webinar workbook, which will give complimentary admission into our 3-day MD Expo. You can register by the mdexposhow.com. Still got some answers coming in, and we're still waiting. Oh, we got a winner. Looks like Dave Lamore from GMI. Guessed correctly. Way to go, Dave. We're going to put that Technation pullover in the mail to you. All right. Technation would like to thank our sponsor, AlphaSource. AlphaSource is your single source for medical equipment replacement parts and ultrasound service. Learn more about this company by visiting alphasource.com. Let's get started. Our presenter today is Pat Lynch. Pat has worked exclusively in healthcare since 1975. Presently, he is busy consulting and doing charitable work. Pat remains active in the profession as a member of over 40 biomedical associations in the U.S. and is a regular contributor to various HTM resources. Pat, you can begin whenever you are ready.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I'm certainly glad to be here today. I hope everybody's in a warm place. If you're not in a warm place, I hope you're in a dry place. Hey, today the title of this presentation is Can Contracts Help Lower the Total Cost of Ownership? We all know the total cost of ownership is pretty much what is the buzzword in HTM today. Cost is what's driving everything, reducing the cost of owning medical equipment. And, you know, I've always been an advocate of eliminating as many contracts as you possibly can, and most of the time you'll save money in the long run. This is based on a study called, I didn't want to use the study as the title because it's a little long, but it's an economic value analysis of the total cost of ownership of the GE Logic 9 ultrasound. I'm presenting this new information on behalf of AlphaSource. You probably know them because of their sales of GE parts, their ultrasound service, and their battery business. I was recently asked to review a white paper that they authored recently. After reading it, I realized that it had some groundbreaking information in it, and it had some never presented analysis of the cost of contracts and the cost of service, and I think it had more information in it than even they realized was in it. First of all, let's back up, and for those of you who may not know who I am, first of all, I've got a whole lot of letters behind my name. I've been around for a whole lot of time. And I've worked in a lot of different areas of biomed for a lot of different large companies, ISOs, and private companies. I've been active in the certification of BMETs and clinical engineers, and I've been active in a whole lot of biomed associations, currently the president of South Carolina Association and the treasurer of the Georgia Association. I also write for 24/7 and BI&T and on their editorial boards. And also have quite a few blogs, and I have one non-for-profit that collects test equipment to send to third world countries. Those are some of the places you can get in touch with me. Anyway, what in the world is cost of ownership? For HTM or biomed, it's basically the cost from cradle to grave to maintain an item of equipment. It includes every single thing that goes into maintaining a piece of equipment from the time you get it to the time you get rid of it. So we've got to drive it down, but we've got to do it intelligently. You've often heard me say all contracts are not created evil, And I've recently come upon a study that has some really groundbreaking information in it. The real question we're going to look at is, for ultrasound service in particular, and this translates to all kinds of higher tech service, but for ultrasound service particularly, is it economically better to have a contract, or to pay time and materials, or to go with in-house service? Conventional wisdom says it's supposed to be cheaper to go to in-house service, and that being without a contract is going to be cheaper than having a contract. But one of the things that we haven't looked at so far is risk. And the risk is that as you go away from having a contract, if there are some unusual repairs that need to be done, some high-cost parts, an unusual number of service calls, you, the customer, are going to be responsible for the cost of those things. And the smart HTM manager will select those things that have a little bit of risk, and the ones that have a lot of risk will then put those on somebody else. You know, up until recently, Aramark, with their digital detectors, they required all of their accounts to have contracts on those digital detectors because they said that's a high enough risk and a high enough cost. We don't want to be responsible for that stuff. That's a measure of intelligent risk-taking. Even a large company like that was not going to take that risk. And I think every HTM manager on there ought to mix risk and the cost associated with that risk with their decision on whether to have a contract or not have a contract. This is a simple chart that or graph that shows where you may select your service options. From your original purchase here on the left-hand side, it's going to come basically with a 1-year warranty. After that 1-year warranty, you're going to go either to an extended warranty or a service contract with the manufacturer. Then you may go to a third-party contract or to time and materials or to in-house service. You've got those options. You can select any one of those to go with. Conventional wisdom tells us that as you move down the chain to the right-hand side, your cost is going to decrease. That's to be expected. We all know that. We all expect that. That's the basis of cost of service ratio. But one of the things that we're going to talk about today is that as you also move to the right-hand side, your risk of having some unexpected cost goes up. And that it's that risk that we've got to use to temper our decisions whether to make that decision or not. You will all recognize this parfait slide that I've been presenting for many, many years. And the parfait slide, for example, is one that shows as you purchase your service from different mixes of providers, that your cost as you move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, your cost of service is probably going to go down. That as you move from an OEM more towards in-house service, you follow that green line to the right, and your cost is going to go down from 100% to as low as about 50 or 40% of the full service price from the OEM. You can see across the top the orange double-ended arrow there is your cost of service ratio, showing that your cost is going to go, your percentage of cost is going to go down from your high of 12 to 20% on the OEM side to as low as 4 to 6% on the right-hand side. To overlay and to show the same thing we showed on the last slide, there is a risk factor that we've never shown on this slide. We've never shown it on here because we didn't have any numbers to quantify it. We all knew it was there. We knew that a full service contract with somebody is going to cover those risks, but that no contract with an in-house service is not going to cover that. But we really didn't mention it or talk about it because there was no way to quantify it. Is it high risk? Is it low risk? What's the chances it's going to get you? How much is it going to affect you? How do you factor it in? It's something we didn't talk about because we really didn't know how. Well, this is the new information from the brand new study that came from AlphaSource, and at the end of this presentation, you'll be given a link that you can go to the AlphaSource website and download this study and look at it. I think it's absolutely going to revolutionize the medical maintenance profession by adding a new dimension. This particular one dealt with ultrasound equipment, since that is what they had the information on, and it's going to give you a lot of information that you can then extrapolate onto other higher tech equipment to help make a decision upon factoring risk into other pieces of equipment. Let me put a couple disclaimers in here. First of all, AlphaSource has shared a preview of the study with me, and they've asked for my opinion on what it means to the HTM community. GE Healthcare did not sponsor, conduct, or participate in the study on its own, on the study or the analysis of the information. And all of the statements and representations made in this particular presentation are those of me, not of AlphaSource or GE. Got to get that out of the way. So anyway, this new study that's come out, it's one of the very few that has real data to support decision making. It's an analysis of the actual costs, the actual potential cost, or the actual costs of servicing medical ultrasound. It's over a 3-year time period, and it's looking at 673 like ultrasound machines. This is a total of 2,019 service years of ultrasound, which is a huge number of pieces of like equipment. This is all the same model of equipment, the GE Logic 9. We look at this, or they looked at this, because this is the one that they had complete 100% service records on. That's another big factor. Some people may have a lot of the same, some large companies or hospital systems may have a lot of the same models of equipment, but they don't have complete service records. You lose what part was put in what machine. Did you have a service call? Did you have a PM done on it? What was done to it? The service records tend to not be very, very complete. We know, since these records, some of them were done when the equipment was under contract with GE, some when it was under contract with AlphaSource. We know these service records are 100% complete. Nothing was missed. We have very good information here. And we also know that this includes the cost of all transducers that were replaced under these contracts. So we do have good information throughout the entire system. It gives us some good stuff. What made it possible? Well, AlphaSource does do service for the legacy ultrasounds for GE. They do have access to the complete service records for the analysis. They took all these ultrasounds for a 3-year period, which represents all these 2,000 device years. They compared the actual costs, or the potential. They compared the actual cost of the service contract to the potential cost if the parts and service had been purchased on a time and materials basis. And they compared these yearly costs to the contract costs. And they did come out with some surprising findings. They found out the average price paid, you'll see where the orange and the blue bars come together, that is the cost of the contract, the average cost of all these contracts per year. And we found that 70% of these customers would have spent more money to service their ultrasound machines than if they did not have a service contract, which is pretty much why you want a service contract. They were the winners by having contracts. That's great. You expect that. That's why you buy a contract. We found that 30% would have spent less if they had not had the contract. So what that's saying is that 30% of these customers, their total cost of service actually went up some, because their total cost of ownership actually went up because of having the contracts. 70% it actually went down. Looking at the next one, we're showing that of this, the patients that, the ones that did not have a contract, they would have spent as much as 4 times the cost of the contract, up to $5,100 in a contract year, to maintain their ultrasound if they had not had the contract. So the 70%, it was to their advantage to have the contract because they would have paid more. So this is really the meat and potatoes of the entire presentation, that of the contract, this is how the people's spending would have been if they had not had their contracts. 37% would have spent about up to 1.5 times as much as the cost of the contract. 23% would have spent about up to 200% of the contract, and then the last 10% could have spent up to 400 or 500% of the price of the contract. To show the next slide, this is kind of like the parfait slide. What we're looking at is that as your expected cost, the copper line, goes down and your risk goes up, the red line, you have a range. I'm going to show the next slide. You have an expected cost savings, which is this green bar. As you're moving, this is a takeoff on the parfait slide, from OEM at the left all the way to in-house on the right, your expected savings tend to grow, and this is from the numbers from the study. Your expected savings tend to grow. You can save some money, but your anticipated potential cost, or not anticipated, but your unexpected cost, the purple, can be very, very high. So what this study shows us is that your savings, as you move from without a contract to in-house, your savings can be fairly small, but your unexpected costs can be very, very high. These are real numbers using these 2019 device years of service. In the next slide, I just cleaned it up, made it nice and pretty, made him some real nice looking little triangles there so you could see them much better. But you can see your expected savings is a smaller wedge, and your unexpected or potential gotchas, the purple wedge, is much larger. And it gets much larger as you move more towards in-house. We're going to talk in a minute why those unexpected costs can be higher. This is just a recap of that first graph we showed you, reinforcing the fact that 70% of the customers with contracts would have spent more because they had the contract. So in that case, the contract for those 70% actually reduced their total cost of ownership, and the 30%, they actually increased their total cost of ownership by having a contract. So the conclusions that we have by looking at this are 30% would have spent less, 70% would have spent more, and then you've got to figure out for yourself, looking at your own situation, the size of your hospital, size of your shop, your training, your preference for risk, your technical expertise, your access to training, how sure are you about which group you would have fallen in, and how risk averse are you, or risk prone are you? To our original question, is it cheaper to have a contract, or to pay time and materials, or to go in-house? Unfortunately, the answer, as with everything, is it depends. As you assume more risk, you save more money, but you might also spend more. If you have aging equipment, your aging equipment may develop multiple failures that may require more labor, more parts, and more troubleshooting to keep it running. depending on your skill mix, your time availability, your number of similar ultrasounds, you really may be better off letting somebody else do the work and be at risk for the service. If you don't have very many of the similar ultrasounds, you may remain a novice in servicing them and never get skilled enough to really reap the rewards of taking the risk of doing the service. If you can find a service provider that will charge you not a very high premium to provide the insurance or the safety or the risk component for you, you may be better off trying that. At this point, I'm not advocating one or the other. I've not changed my stance that I've always had. This is simply another factor that everybody should be aware of, should evaluate, should spend a little time thinking about, should apply it, should use it if it applies to you, should ignore it or not pay attention if it doesn't apply to you. Here's a few factors that definitely can affect a higher risk and can make you more likely to lose money by going in-house on your higher risk stuff. First one, small shop size. You're a one-man, a two-man, a three-man, person shop. You're running around trying to do everything. You barely keep up with what you're doing. You don't have the time to take on more stuff. You've got the best intentions, wanting to save money, take on more, help the hospital save money, but you just don't have the time or the resources to be able to jump into these other things and do them. You just don't have the time to become proficient. The fact that you want to do it, that there's some cost savings to be there, if you just can't pull the resources together to do it, or you don't have the people to be able to allocate to it, it's just a pipe dream, and you're not likely to get very good at doing it. Second thing, low numbers of like ultrasounds or any high-tech equipment that you have a lot of different ones. We all know that standardization is not something that hospitals do very well. They have a lot of different units. They're not the same. A lot of times they're different brands, different models, different features, different everything. Every time you walk up to one, it's like walking up to an entirely different unit. You don't have 15 of the same model to work on, so every one is like a brand new, first time you've seen it kind of thing. Not a real great experience. Takes a lot of time, runs your cost up, and it is more difficult to reap the rewards of doing in-house service. Third thing, you might have old units with incomplete service histories. Old units that don't have incomplete service histories, you inherit these things. They're under service contract with somebody else, with a manufacturer, with a third party. You don't get the complete service. You don't know what went wrong with them. You don't know what service went wrong. You don't know if they're error prone. You don't know if they're lemons out of the shop. You don't know if they throw a power supply every fourth week or not. You just don't know what happened with them. There's no way of knowing if they have those problems or not. And you're going to jump right in and take care of them. It's very difficult. You can be buying something that has a real problem with it, and you just don't know it. Unsure parts availability. Excuse me. As equipment gets old, we know that there are a lot more parts floating around on a lot of equipment, but as you go around to purchase those parts, you're not a lot of times sure if you're buying them from somebody in their garage who's sitting there in his underwear selling you a part that he's taking off a machine, out of his garage or something. Quality, availability, resources. We know that people keep parts and they sell parts of things that turn over in their inventory, and if they don't turn over a lot, they get rid of them. They can't afford to keep them in stock. And therein lies a problem, is parts availability starts becoming an issue. It may be a problem getting access to some of these as the equipment gets older. High personnel turnover. If you don't have if your hospital or your employer doesn't have a good history at keeping people employed, you're not going to have probably a very good track record at getting people some high-tech training and keeping them employed. They're going to take that high-tech training, go down the road, and parlay that training to the hospital down the road for an extra $1 an hour in salary. And that's not going to work out well because you never have the ability to really build up that expertise on your equipment, even if you have the right number of people and staffing to be able to do it. Here's a new one that's just coming up to us. A lot of you are probably seeing it now. I see a lot of hospitals that are running into this right now. People are retiring all over the place. So that our most experienced, our most senior, our most knowledgeable people who have moved up and are working on our highest tech equipment tend to be retiring. It's very difficult to build a high-tech repair operation around one person or around a guy who you know is going to be retiring in a year or two. That's just the way it is. It's very difficult. It's hard to figure out where to go. So these are just some factors that I think you ought to keep at hand, evaluate if you're in these categories and what these may do for you, and if they put you in the higher risk of running into some high costs that you're not anticipating. What to look for to figure out if a contract is right for you. Here's some things, and I took this straight out of some contract stuff I've been doing for 5 years. Number one, look for a short-term contract. Get an annual contract if you can. Don't get one that goes past a year. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what prices are going to do. You don't know what the equipment's going to do. You need to be able to make some changes. The VA will not sign contracts for more than 1 year. There's some reason in that. So look for somebody who will sign you and be happy to sign you a short-term contract. Make sure they don't have very many exclusions and look at what those exclusions are. If they're excluding the very things that you need included, it's not going to be a contract that helps you very much. Make sure that they're giving you coverage for the hours that you need. If you only work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, don't buy one that gives you 24/7 coverage. Not needed. Also make sure that if you need them to do after hours PMs, don't buy one that says they have to do PMs during 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. Make sure that the hours match up with when you want them to do the work. Here's a big one. Since CMS requires imaging equipment to be done per manufacturer specifications, and your hospital reimbursements rely on that, make sure that you have some sort of a guarantee that they will meet all regulatory standards, both now and if they change. And also make sure that they don't just use the word guarantee. Find out what are the terms of that guarantee. Make sure it has some financial consequences. I hear people all the time saying, I guarantee it. Well, what does that guarantee mean? Does it mean you get 10% off of next year's contract? Hell, if you're giving me a bad contract this year, I don't want 10% off of next year's bad contract. It's about as stupid as you can get. Do not get something that doesn't have a guarantee that puts money back in your pocket or that gets you out of a contract. Make sure you have a quick response time. That's what you need. You don't want the equipment down, particularly if it's high-tech. Make sure you have well-trained engineers. Look at where they're getting their engineers, where they get their training, how they're trained, what sort of backup they have, what sort of escalation policy they have. You need to make sure that you got good trained people. And make sure that you have an out clause for any reason or no reason if you have a contract longer than a year. For a year or less, who cares? You're not going to get people to let you out. If you sign a 1-year contract, you're not going to care to get out in 90 days. They're not going to do that. Nobody's going to do that for less than a 1-year contract. But if it's longer than a year, you need to have an out clause for any reason or no reason. Absolutely required. And the other thing, you've got to think about contracts are just less work. Now for biomeds, we're in the work business, so it doesn't matter to us, but if it's managed by like a radiology director, here's what contracts mean. If you got a contract, you just call the 800 number and wait for the service person. If you don't have a contract, for each service call, you got to get a purchase order, call their dispatch, give them their billing information, track the service, collect the service ticket, verify the times and what parts they replaced, wait for the bill, match the invoice to the ticket for accuracy, pay the bill, and then go from there. So you got 9 things to do for each one rather than just make the call. It is more work to have no service contract. These are things to think about. Takeaways. I hope you take away from this. If you've got a financial risk, if the financial risk of higher cost is negligible or it's well within your control, by all means take the most risky option. There's no reason not to. But if the risk of losing money is high, or if it outweighs the gains, take the safer option. You can put this slide in front of your CFO, your risk manager, your financial consultant, anybody you want to who deals with risk. Put this slide in front of them. They're going to read these 2 things and they're going to say, hell yeah, that's just, risk 101 right there. So this is your real takeaways from here, and you need to apply it to contracts, and whether to go about with contracts or not, this is what makes sense. And it applies risk to your potential cost savings. I'll give you before we take questions, I want to give you a real quick word from our sponsor. AlphaSource is a medical parts distributor for 30 years. They've been a battery manufacturer for about 10. They've had a GE relationship for over 10 years, and they've been supporting end-of-life ultrasound since 2013. They do offer both hourly billed service and service contracts. They have service contracts that have all these advantages here: short-term, comprehensive, priority service times. They do have hard-to-find parts for aged models, which they got directly from GE, I think. They meet or exceed all regulatory requirements for CMS, ACR, and Joint Commission. Their highly trained engineers are focused only on ultrasound, don't do anything but ultrasound. And they do have all the proprietary GE service keys and all the GE technical and clinical support. They have all that directly from GE. And you can go to alphasource.com to learn more. That pretty much concludes it. That's the message. If you want a copy of the white paper and this presentation, you can visit alphasource.com/EVA, and let's have some questions, please.
Okay, Pat, thank you so much. We got a couple questions here. The first one is, my boss needs some convincing to consider a service contract. I think there are a pretty good idea because we are a very busy biomed department and have techs retiring in a few years. What would be the top 3 reasons I should use to convince him to take a look?
To take a look at a service contract?
The boss needs some convincing to consider a service contract. What would be 3 reasons he could use to convince him to take a look at it?
Well, the first thing is I would look real closely at your high personnel, your high retirement rate, and look at who it is going to be retiring. If your people are going to be retiring and your lower echelon people are going to be moving up, then everybody's going to be disrupted and moved to certain places. So it's potential that nobody is going to be doing the same job 3 years from now that they're going to be doing today. So everybody's going to be changing. So unless you can get some technical people doing the same job to do it consistently over the next few years, that makes sense. The other thing is it's staffing. Everybody's looking at reducing staffing, and a lot of hospitals are looking at, when people retire, not replacing them. That means your shop is going to get very much busier. I think you need to have some candid discussions with your boss to say, hey, am I going to be able to replace these people when they retire, or are you going to try to drive down my staffing people? And what's that going to do to my staffing and numbers? And if it looks like that's going to be their attitude, I think you'd be silly to go ahead and take on any more work right now. I think you'd be good to look at outsourcing as much as you can, get as much off your plate before he tries to put more work on you.
Okay, got another one here. I wouldn't have thought our annual average costs were close to $10,000 per year. Can you help me understand why these costs are so high?
Well, I really, you got to look at each one, at each cost of each service incident. I will tell you that one of the number one reasons for ultrasound service costs to be high is transducers. They drop them and break them. They abuse them. They twist them. They've got cords. They break them. They've got 128 pieces of coax wire inside that thing. They break them. They kink them. They run over them. They need a lot of work. They have, ceramic crystals in them. When they drop them on the floor, they break them. That's a problem, and they're expensive. So, and this particular study did include replaced transducers, so that could account for a lot of that. The second thing is bad power. I don't know if anybody's ever checked their power, but bad power, since ultrasounds pretty much these days are pretty much all digital, bad power over time kills digital components. It tends to break down and kill digital ICs and digital, microprocessors. And that's one reason that older digital components, they may be broken down over time by having spikes in the power circuit. So it may be working today, but they may be one more surge away from breaking down. So it's going to be depending on, where you are, what your electricity looks like, and what kind of care your staff gives it. And also if you're a teaching hospital. When you get residents and new people in there just out of college, those guys don't care about anything. They're wild, they're crazy, they tear up the entire damn hospital. So it could be anything.
Okay. On the slide where you had the parts pricing, the question is, did the parts pricing come from the OEM or from the aftermarket?
The parts pricing was, it was not OEM pricing. It was aftermarket. It was not strictly OEM, but it was not lowest price aftermarket. It was, as I recall, it was the Alpha Source pricing, which was lower than the GE pricing, but maybe not as low as you could buy from somebody's garage.
Okay. Great. Next question. Does this include probe coverage?
Yes, there were probes covered in the contract. It wasn't unlimited probes. There were a finite number of probes covered under the contract, and I do not recall the number, but there was a finite number of probes covered under the contract mentioned.
Okay, next question. Does this study take into account service received from the OEM versus a third-party service company?
Every single one of these 2019 service years was delivered either by GE or by Alpha Source. During this particular period, GE provided the service, then they handed off the service contracts to Alpha Source to continue the service, so that part of this service was done by GE, then it was done by Alpha Source. So that was the two entities that provided the service for these ultrasounds.
Okay, next one. I have found that OEMs are charging more for aged equipment parts. Is this a trend everywhere to get us to purchase new products?
I don't know. I don't track. I don't know anything about the price of old parts versus new equipment parts. I do know that I'm pleasantly surprised that GE, instead of just end-of-lifing their GE Logic 9s, which I guess they could have done, they actually handed them off to Alpha Source and says, here, we don't think we can service them effectively anymore. We would like you to continue the service on them because we don't want to force our old customers to buy new ultrasounds. We want them to be able to use their old ultrasounds past the point that we can service them effectively, which is something that I would not have expected out of GE. Certainly, I've said some bad things about GE in the past, and that would not be something that I would expect out of GE. It surprised me when I heard that.
Okay, this next attendee has a question. Can you show the percentage of those repairs were transducers and how many sites have the users pay for the probes and physical damage?
I only looked at the study itself. I never got down and looked at the raw data behind the study. So when you get the study, when you go to their website and you download the study, you can see what is in there, but I don't think you'll find that study in there, and I was not given access to the raw data behind the study.
Okay, next one. Does this type of study cross over well to other types of imaging equipment such as mobile C-arms or standard rad rooms which lack items like transducers?
I would think that the general principles should cross over fairly easily. I would think that they should. There should be parts in there that would be comparable, and some of the general lessons learned should be probably just about the same.
All right, next one. Does the cost include vendor travel time in your study? This would not be taken into consideration in an in-house program and can be quite costly.
All of that was included in the cost of the contract, so yes, that did include it.
Okay, looks like we got one more, folks. Unless you have any more, please post them and using the question feature on the right-hand side of your dashboard. Next question, Pat. You mentioned short-term annual contracts are preferable, but we've been advised that contract prices for X number of years are best to be locked when equipment is purchased. What would you recommend?
Well, it depends on who's advising you that. Probably, I've often said never, ever, ever purchase a service contract when you purchase equipment. That's the same thing. That's called a point of sale contract. It's the same thing as buying an extended warranty when you're walking out of Best Buy and they're trying to sell you something on your big screen TV as you walk out. I'll bet you that nobody in the audience who's listening to this has ever bought more than one or two of those things. And I'll bet you that even of the one or two people who have done that, only half of those people have ever even used it, and that probably nobody would ever buy one again because it's really not worth it. It's one of those gut feel things that you buy. You know it's too expensive, but when you're buying a very expensive something, you just feel afraid to not have some kind of protection. And that is why those companies try to sell you that. And that's why they try to sell you that at the point of equipment purchase, and they want to sell it to you when only the director of radiology is negotiating it, because the HTM manager is not participating in the purchase, and it basically locks out in-house service or any sort of alternative service arrangements before the equipment's even delivered to the hospital. So point of sale contracts are they're just not good. If you want to, they're exactly the same as consumer point of sale contracts at the checkout counter. If you want to read some of the reasoning behind that, I would be glad to provide you with some. If you would like to go to Consumer Reports, they analyze the ones that Best Buy and Office Depot and all those other companies try to sell you, and their recommendation is never buy them. They're not worth it.
Got another couple of good questions here, Pat. Next one is, how much of the study 2019 service years represent in-house activity?
0, because these were all units that were under contract.
Okay, looks like we got one more here. We all know that cost is important, but what about response time with the equipment being down and in some cases patient wait time going up? In-house service is not all about cost.
And that is true, and that is something else that's going to have to be factored in. Again, how far you are from a service provider. You know, are they local? Do they have to come from across the country? how many redundant systems do you have? How busy are you? That sort of thing. That is a local decision that you'll have to make there. And a lot of times it is very possible for a local in-house, even if you do have a contract, to make that first response call to see if you can do something while you've got a service responder in-house. So sometimes you have to do a blended, and yes, you're absolutely right. A quick response time from an in-house person is something that an outside provider can never give you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Looks like that's going to wrap up the questions in today's webinar. We want to thank Pat, and thanks again to our today's sponsor, AlphaSource. Remember, one lucky attendee today will win lunch for their entire department. Details are included in the post-webinar survey, which will appear on your screen shortly. You must complete the survey to obtain your certificate of attendance. If you do not see the survey, email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Thanks again, Pat. Everybody, appreciate your support of Webinar Wednesday. Have a great rest of the day. We'll see you next time.